ChatGerry, a simple conclusion from my 230 to stroke research papers, number 1565, the 8th of March 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, stroke summary. Introduction. Over the past 8 months after my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025, I conducted an intensive investigation into my own medical condition. During these 253 days, I wrote 258 research papers. About 90% of those papers, roughly 230 papers, focused on stroke, vascular health, blood pressure control, and neurological recovery. My goal was very simple. I wanted to understand why the stroke happened and what I must do to prevent the next one. At the beginning, the problem appeared very complicated. Stroke involves many medical factors such as vascular disease, aging, blood pressure regulation, and metabolic disorders like diabetes. However, after months of systematic analysis using my Viscoplastic Medicine Theory (VMT), topology concepts, stochastic probability, and more than 17 years of personal health data over 4 million data points, the explanation of my stroke gradually became clear. Surprisingly, the final explanation turned out to be quite simple. The long history behind my stroke, the real beginning of my stroke, did not occur in 2025. It started 4 decades earlier, around 1978. When I was about 31 years old, I began gaining weight. Over time, my body weight increased until my BMI exceeded 31, placing me in the obesity category. The main reason was that I adopted typical American dietary habits and consumed large amounts of processed food. Obesity eventually led to type 2 diabetes around 1990 when I was 43 years old. From that moment forward, my vascular system began experiencing long-term metabolic stress. Chronically elevated glucose levels gradually damaged the endothelial lining of my blood vessels and promoted vascular calcification. In simple terms, my arteries slowly became stiffer and more fragile, like a household water pipe gradually weakened by acid corrosion. Therefore, the primary root cause of my stroke was not aging. The main cause was long-term metabolic damage, driven by obesity and type 2 diabetes. 2 very different periods of vascular damage. My medical history can be divided into 2 very different periods. The first period was the medication era from 1990 to 2009. During those 20 years, my diabetes was treated mainly with medications. At that time, I did not yet fully understand the importance of lifestyle management such as diet control, physical activity, sleep quality, stress control, and daily health monitoring. As a result, metabolic stress on my vascular system continued for many years. Using my viscoplastic energy VMT model, I estimated that about 91% of the total stroke-related vascular damage accumulated during those first 20 years. This period represented the main stage of structural weakening in my cerebral blood vessels. The lifestyle correction period, around 2010, I made a major change in my life. I began managing my health aggressively through lifestyle control. I reduced my body weight by 60 pounds. Improved my diet quality, reduced food portions, increased daily exercise to around 14,000 walking steps per day, and closely monitored my body weight and glucose levels. Over the following 16 years from 2010 to 2025, my metabolic condition improved dramatically. During this lifestyle-focused period, the additional vascular damage accumulated much more slowly. My VMT energy analysis suggests that only about 9% of the total stroke-related damage accumulated during these 16 years. This means that the lifestyle management period produced only about 1/10 of the damage that occurred during the medication era. This finding strongly suggests that lifestyle management was far more effective than medications alone in slowing the progression of vascular damage. Unfortunately, the structural damage that accumulated earlier had already produced irreversible changes in my cerebral microvessels, including calcification. The role of aging. Aging also contributes to vascular risk. As we grow older, arteries gradually lose elasticity and become stiffer, similar to water or gas pipes in household systems. However, aging does not act alone. Its effect interacts with other metabolic conditions. In my case, aging was only a secondary factor. The dominant cause was the long history of diabetes caused by obesity. The final trigger, although the structural damage accumulated slowly over 3 decades, the stroke itself occurred during a sudden triggering event, around noon on June 21, 2025. My systolic blood pressure suddenly rose to about 175 mmHg. This spike was most likely triggered by emotional stress related to a real estate investment project. This acute hypertension episode produced a strong mechanical load on me already weakened cerebral microvessels. The vessel wall could no longer withstand the pressure, and a rupture occurred in the pontine region of my brain. Pontine hemorrhagic strokes are known to carry very high mortality rates, often reported between 40% and 70% depending on the size of the bleed and the speed of treatment. From a biophysical perspective, the mechanism can be summarized simply: long-term metabolic damage plus vascular stiffness and aging plus acute blood pressure spike equals hemorrhagic stroke. My future protection strategy: because the structural damage in my cerebral vessels cannot be reversed, my future protection must focus on controlling the triggering factor, which is acute hypertension. Simply watching average blood pressure numbers is not sufficient for stroke prevention. The most dangerous factor in my case is sudden blood pressure spikes. To detect these events early, I now measure my blood pressure about 20 to 24 times each day. From these measurements I calculate several additional biomarkers, including pulse pressure, mean arterial pressure, and a personalized indicator that I developed called the Stroke Risks Triggering Sensitivity Index, or TSIC attached figure. The TSI combines systolic blood pressure, the load, and pulse pressure, the stiffness, to estimate the mechanical stress acting on my vascular system. When TSI rises toward a dangerous range for my personal case, the threshold is around 100. It warns me that my vascular system may be approaching a risky condition. If I see this warning signal on my iPhone screen approaching 100, I immediately take action. I reduce stress by stopping emotional conversations, performing breathing exercises using a 4-second inhale and 8-second exhale pattern, resting, or adjusting my daily activities. For my personal case, my goal is to keep TSI below 100. If TSI rises above 120, it indicates that I may be entering a dangerous situation. It is important to note that TSI is a personal monitoring proxy developed for my own preventive purposes and is not intended to be a clinical guideline. Different patients may require different thresholds depending on their vascular condition and medical history. What I learned from my 230 written stroke papers: looking back over these 8 months of research, I realized something interesting about the scientific learning process. When someone studies a complex subject for a long time, the learning process usually follows several stages. First comes the exploration phase. During this stage, many papers are written and many angles are explored in order to understand the mechanism. My 230 stroke research papers represent this phase. Next comes the pattern recognition phase. Gradually the pieces begin to connect. Cause, structure, trigger, and prevention mechanisms become clearer. Finally comes the compression phase. Once the mechanism is fully understood, the explanation becomes simple and clear. This pattern is common in both science and engineering. The deeper the understanding becomes, the simpler the final explanation often appears. Albert Einstein once expressed a similar idea: if you cannot explain something simply, you do not understand it well enough. My stroke research followed exactly this path. After writing more than 230 stroke papers and analyzing my 4 million data points from many different perspectives, the final explanation became very simple. Long-term metabolic damage plus vascular stiffness plus acute hypertension trigger equals hemorrhagic stroke. This simple model now guides my daily health management. Final thoughts. The most important outcome of this long investigation is that I now understand the mechanism of my stroke and have developed a practical method to monitor my future risk, my TSI proxy PA. Now, if this knowledge helps me prevent another stroke and also helps other patients better understand their own health risks, then the past 253 days off work and the 230 stroke-related research papers will have been worthwhile. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.